Wherever you are, welcome. You're about to drift thousands of years into the past, before alarms, before cities, before deodorant. If this kind of prehistoric piece makes you smile, make sure to subscribe, hit that little bell, and drop a comment below. What would you bring to the clan? Now take a deep breath. The fire's low, the night air is still. Let the screen dim. Let your thoughts wander. Let yourself fade just like the firelight. Sleep is near. The sun wasn't so much rising as it was reluctantly leaking light into the endless expanse of dust, bone, and broken dreams. The air was crisp, cool, and smelled faintly of wet dirt and mammoth dung, like nature's version of an air freshener that no one asked for. In a shallow depression between two hills, a small clan of Homo sapiens began to stir. They weren't in a city, a village, or even a structured camp. They were sprawled around a cluster of fire pits that had gone cold in the night, curled under furs that used to belong to things with teeth. Life in 10,000 BCE didn't have alarms. It had mosquitoes, and when one particularly persistent bloodsucker nosed its way into young Tuka's ear, she slapped herself awake with a grunt, flailing in a half-frozen haze. Her younger brother, Un, already squatting nearby and poking at a beetle with exaggerated concentration, smirked. He was 5 and had all the wisdom of someone who thought dung beetles were just spicy snacks. Tuka sat up and scratched her head, dislodging 2 lice, a pine needle, and what might have been a crumb of squirrel. Morning grooming was minimal scratching, sniffing, and a quick pick through the fur for anything edible or moving. Hygiene, after all, was mostly a side effect of hunger. Their mother, Ka, a broad-shouldered woman who moved like she was already annoyed with the day, stood and stretched. Her joints popped like roasting bark. Beside her, the clan's informal leader, Daro, tried to relight the fire by furiously rubbing 2 sticks together with a look that said he was very sure it had worked this way once. Everyone else just waited for the sun to do its job. There was no schedule, no to-do list. The day would unfold, like it always did, slow, meandering, and mostly dictated by how hungry everyone got. Tuka glanced toward the east, where the horizon shimmered with the promise of absolutely nothing. No city skyline, no smoke, no neighbours. Just endless scrubland, dotted with rocks that could either be weapons or stools, depending on the moment. The clan was 11 people strong, 2 elders, 5 adults, 3 children, and 1 guy named Hearn who nobody was entirely sure belonged. He had shown up 3 moons ago during a migration lull, said nothing, ate a bunch of pine nuts, and never left. Since he hadn't tried to kill anyone, or accidentally set fire to anything, no one objected too loudly. Breakfast, if it could be called, that was a round of scavenging. Darrow sent the younger ones toward the thorn bushes in search of bird eggs or unfortunate lizards. The adults split into pairs, heading out with stone knives, leather slings, and the desperate optimism of people who once mistook a porcupine for a very angry chicken. Tuka paired with her uncle Grell, a man with 1 eye, 2 teeth, and an endless supply of stories that were 80% grunting and 20% exaggerated hand gestures. As they pushed through underbrush that had 0 respect for bare legs, Grell pointed at a tuft of fur snagged on a low branch. He grunted, which Tuka interpreted as, "That's either a rabbit or the world's most fragile bear." They followed the trail anyway. Not because they were sure, but because following a trail gave the illusion of purpose, and in prehistoric times, illusion was half of sanity. Meanwhile, back at the camp, Un proudly presented a handful of beetles to Ka. She pretended to consider them, then, accidentally, dropped one into the fire pit. Un pouted. "Cooking," she said flatly, the prehistoric version of nice try. The other children, too young to hunt and too annoying to ignore, played a game involving sticks, stones, and elaborate accusations of cheating. One had fashioned a doll out of bark and sinew, which was immediately stolen and decapitated in the name of war. This was their form of cultural expression, mostly yelling and dirt-throwing, but with great sincerity. By mid-morning, the clan had reconvened under the shade of a crooked tree that offered no actual protection from the sun, but at least gave them something to glare at. The haul was pitiful. 3 quail eggs, a strip of sun-dried squirrel meat someone had hidden in their loincloth, no questions, and a half-smashed tuber that tasted like mud and regret. But no one complained too much. Complaining burned energy. Energy required calories. And calories were as rare as a woolly rhino that didn't want to stomp you flat. Kaa chewed slowly, her eyes scanning the horizon. She wasn't looking for enemies, just something new. Anything. But the truth was, life before cities didn't offer much in the way of plot twists. You woke up. You ate something. Or didn't. You walked. You poked things with sticks. Sometimes you got poked back. Repeat until death or accidental cave-in. There was comfort in the monotony, though. Familiar faces. Shared grunts. The nightly fire. It was the same kind of comfort people now get from watching the same sitcom reruns every night, predictable, dumb, and somehow deeply reassuring. A sharp cry cut through the silence. Hearn had stepped on a thorn. Again. This was the third time this week. The clan had started calling him Auhearn, which in their proto-language meant guy who can't watch his damn feet. Oh. He limped back into camp, dramatically lifting his sole to reveal the tiny intruder lodged in his heel. Kaa rolled her eyes and threw him a bone shard to dig it out with. The bone had previously been used to scoop marrow, scrape hides, and once as a makeshift toothpick. Multi-purpose tools were the iPhones of the era. By afternoon, the sun was directly overhead, making the air thick and the ground shimmer. The clan sought shade under rock overhangs or buried themselves in leaf piles. Napping was not just tradition, it was a strategy. Move less, sweat less, die less. Tuka lay back on the ground, staring up at a passing vulture. She wondered what it would be like to fly away from the dust, the stink, the endless sameness. Then a beetle crawled across her face and she remembered. Flying things also ate bugs. The day would drag on, as days did. But in its simplicity, there was a strange kind of peace. No taxes, no screens, no meetings that could have been an ochre drawing. Just dirt, bugs, and the slow march toward a dinner that hopefully didn't fight back. The word breakfast didn't exist yet, but if it had, it would have been pronounced something like a long groan followed by the sound of a stomach pretending to be a bear. The sun had fully risen now, warm but not punishing, and the clan began their daily tradition of foraging, aka nature's least satisfying buffet. Tuka, still itchy from her ground nap and chewing yesterday's regrets from her teeth, wandered with Kaa and the other adults toward a dry thicket of shrubs that had previously yielded a few edible surprises. The goal wasn't exactly cuisine, it was to not starve. And for a species that had mastered fire and spears, their breakfast routine looked suspiciously like trial and error with a side of ant bites. Kaa crouched low and poked at the base of a plant with the tip of a pointed stick, revealing a white bulb the size of an underwhelming turnip. She plucked it and gave it a quick sniff. This meant, not deadly, probably bitter, will make you poop sideways but not die. They pocketed it. Meanwhile, Tuka's cousin Bren had found a cluster of bird nests high in the crooked limbs of a narrow tree. Being the most nimble and the least valuable in terms of hunting, Bren was usually nominated for tree duty. He scurried up like a hyperactive monkey and began swiping eggs with the urgency of someone who knew vultures don't wait for you to climb down before taking offense. He managed 4 pale speckled eggs, one of which he cracked on the way down and immediately slurped like it was a prehistoric protein shake. Kaa watched him with a face that said, "One day you'll fall, and I'll still eat the eggs." On the forest floor, Oon toddled around after a fat beetle the size of his thumb. He tried to poke it, but it simply ignored him, crawling with the unstoppable confidence of something too gross to mess with. Oon, undeterred, plopped it into his mouth. From a distance, Daro saw this, shouted something that sounded like "bleg," and sprinted over to yank the beetle out. Oon bit down defiantly and chomped half its backside. Daro held up the rest still wriggling and gave a sigh that was equal parts pride and horror. "Well, he's learning," Kaa muttered. Elsewhere, Hearn had wandered off again. This was becoming a pattern. One moment he'd be poking at moss, the next he'd vanish like a fart in the wind. He always came back, but never with anything useful. Today he returned an hour later, with a bundle of mushrooms cradled like sacred relics. He presented them like a chef on opening night. Tuka eyed them. Last time we ate your mushrooms, Aunt Heek tried to climb a tree and claimed to be a mountain goat. Hearn shrugged and bit one. His eyes crossed slightly, then he smiled. Okay, Tucker said. Save those for a special occasion. Back in the shallow valley they called home. Though no one called anything home yet, the group gathered to compare their loot. The final count: 3 wild onions, 4 eggs, 2 half-dead lizards, one of which tried to escape twice, a handful of edible tubers, and a single bright yellow fruit that looked suspiciously like it would cause an itchy death. Kay inspected the fruit and handed it to Darrow. Gift, she said. This meant, you eat it first, and if you survive, I'll consider it. Darrow sniffed the fruit. It smelled like overripe feet. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, then spat out the skin. Meh. Ho. This was prehistoric language for probably safe. Tastes like sadness. The clan sat cross-legged, forming a loose circle of dirt, grass, and mutual disappointment. They passed around their hall like a poorly organized potluck. The kids fought over eggs, the adults nibbled the tubers, and everyone ignored the lizards until Carr finally cooked them over the rekindled fire. They sizzled, twitched once, then gave up. The smell was technically edible. Smoky, slightly musky, a touch of burnt fur and accidental ash, like if you tried to roast socks over a campfire. Tucker chewed her share slowly, wondering not for the first time why the gods hadn't invented butter yet, or salt, or literally anything that would make charred lizard taste less like crunchy foot. Mid-meal, a sudden rustle in the bushes made everyone freeze mid-chew. Darrow stood quickly, spear in hand, eyes scanning the brush. A moment later, a hare bounded out and took off across the clearing, as if mocking them for not being fast or focused enough to eat real food. Gone, Grell mumbled, licking his fingers. Fast food. That was joke 1. It earned a few tired chuckles. Once the adrenaline wore off, they returned to picking bark from their molars. The meal was done, which mostly meant we're slightly less likely to die today. Afterward, the younger children played a game involving throwing rocks at each other's feet and screaming, while the adults began the second act of the day, poking around aimlessly and pretending it was productive. Kay went to inspect the shallow stream nearby. The water level had dropped again, revealing cracked earth and a small pile of turtle shells. She picked one up and used it to scoop water. Tuka joined her and drank from her cupped hands, the cold liquid tasting faintly of mud and old fish. Hydration wasn't glamorous. As they rested by the stream, Carr sighed. Too dry. Tuka nodded. We move again soon? Maybe. After next moon, there it was, the eternal cycle. Settle, eat, dry up, move. Like trying to live on a slowly spinning roulette wheel that never quite landed on comfortable. As the sun arced higher, casting the world in a blinding wash of white light, the group began to sprawl out. Afternoon would bring more hunting attempts, perhaps firewood collection, maybe some rock licking to see if anything had changed. But for now, they digested their morning in silence. Hearn sat alone, staring at a mushroom and mumbling what sounded like love poetry. Grell snored with his mouth open, daring the flies to get ambitious. Oon was digging a hole with both hands, convinced that something shiny must be at the bottom. And Tuka? She lay back on the grass, belly fullish, head resting on her hands, staring up at the sky. She imagined what life would be like if food just stayed in one place. If the water didn't vanish. If they could sleep without ants crawling into their ears. She wouldn't have called it a city, of course. The word didn't exist. But the idea? It was there, flickering in the background like a dream you're not sure is yours. And for a moment, beneath the buzz of flies and the burp of someone who'd swallowed a raw egg wrong, it almost felt peaceful. By the time the heat started to loosen the bugs from their hiding spots, Darrow had made a decision. They would hunt something larger today. Not because they were starving, though Carr had very publicly threatened to chew on Hearn's toes if he brought home more mushrooms, but because the clan was, in Darrow's words, due for a miracle. That miracle? A mammoth. Or, more realistically, a juvenile mammoth. Or most realistically, a mammoth-shaped disappointment followed by a lot of running. Preparations began with Darrow pacing around the clearing, dramatically sharpening a stone-tipped spear with another rock that was objectively not doing much. He gestured toward a few others, Carr, Grell, Bren, and, with surprising reluctance, Hearn, the elite squad. Tucker watched with the eyes of someone who knew elite just meant available and not currently pooping. They'd seen mammoth tracks 3 days ago, wide, shallow, and heading west. If the gods were feeling theatrical, and they usually were, maybe the herd had lingered. Of course, tracking mammoths wasn't a science. It was more of a sweaty, foot-destroying guessing game that often ended with blisters and the realization that you'd been following your own footprints in a loop. Still, they set off. Spears in hand, animal skin bags slung across their backs, feet wrapped in questionable footwear made from yesterday's regrets. The rest of the clan stayed behind, tending the fire, annoying each other, and taking turns watching Oon try to climb things he absolutely shouldn't. The hunting party crested a ridge and scanned the lowland. To the south, a patch of grass had been stomped flat. Mammoth. Probably. Unless it was the work of 30 very organized rabbits. Bren was sent ahead as scout. Mostly because he was fast, quiet, and young enough that if a tusk came flying out of the grass, he was considered replaceable. He disappeared into the tall reeds, leaving behind only a faint trail of flattened grass and adolescent bravado. After a long pause, he returned wide-eyed, panting, and whispering in the universal language of panic. One, young, drinking. The words were broken but clear enough. There was a juvenile mammoth. It was alone. It was by water, and it hadn't noticed them yet. Darrow's face lit up. This was either a divine gift or an elaborate test, and he was fully prepared to fail it with confidence. They moved forward slowly, crouched low like oversized squirrels with murder on their minds. The brush parted just enough to reveal it. A young mammoth, maybe a third the size of its parents, dark grey fur still fluffy, ears twitching as it slurped from a muddy pool. It looked peaceful, happy, even, which was deeply unfortunate. Darrow gave the signal. Everyone nodded. Then Hearn sneezed. The mammoth's ears snapped up. It turned, blinked its beady eyes at the weird pile of twitching humans behind the bushes, and froze. So did they. This was the moment. Attack or freeze forever. Carr lunged first, spear raised, emitting a sound that might have been a war cry or indigestion. The others followed with all the grace of people who've never successfully hunted something that could trample them into their own footprints. Chows. The mammoth screamed like a trumpet, having an existential crisis, and bolted. Grell tried to throw a spear, but tripped on a root and went down hard. Bren hit it in the shoulder, barely penetrating its fur. Darrow charged forward but slipped in the mud and fell face first into a puddle that smelled like boiled skunk. Only Carr managed to land a blow, her spear grazing the mammoth's side as it stampeded away in a blur of panic and flapping ears. It vanished into the trees, leaving behind only a faint trail of blood, a broken spear, and several bruised egos. Silence. Grell groaned from the ground. Victory? Darrow spat out mud. We softened it. For someone else. Tucker, watching from a distance, clutched her gut, trying not to laugh. She had followed quietly, staying out of the action because her real role was post-hunt triage. And comedy. They regrouped under a half-dead tree and surveyed the damage. Grell's ankle was swollen, Darrow's pride was shattered, and Hearn was still sniffing the bushes like maybe the mammoth left snacks behind. Carr, stoic as ever, muttered, "We eat lizard again." That was joke too. It got a few pity laughs. Bren poked at his wounded pride and tried to spin it. "We learned. That's good. What we learned," Carr said, "is that Hearn shouldn't sneeze near edible things." Hearn held up a clump of fur he'd found stuck to a branch. "Souvenir. That'll side. Next time, we bring traps." They didn't have traps. The walk back was slower, filled with limping, arguing, and the occasional hopeful glance toward the horizon, in case the mammoth changed its mind and came back to apologize. It didn't. By the time they returned to camp, the rest of the clan had already assumed the worst. Oon was halfway through drawing a picture in the dirt of everyone being stomped on by a creature that looked like a hairy potato with legs. Kaa tossed the broken spear down. Failed. Slightly. Darrow flopped onto the ground beside the fire and stared at the sky. It's humbling, being this bad at dinner. They passed around the last bits of the morning's leftovers. The roasted lizard was now stiff and chewy, but it beat gnawing on pine cones. Again, Tuka leaned back, resting her head on Kaa's shoulder. Maybe we get one next time. Kaa smiled faintly. Or the mammoth gets us. And somehow, that was comforting. Failure was just part of the cycle. They'd try again, they'd probably fail again, but every time they got a little better. Or at least a little funnier. And as the stars began to poke holes in the sky, Grell lifted his injured leg and declared, "At least I got a scar. Makes me look brave." That was joke 3. Even the beetles seemed to laugh. The fire crackled as if it too had opinions. Sparks drifted lazily into the night, curling into the sky like gossip being carried off by the wind. The clan sat in their loose circle of bones, rocks and questionable moss, full of exactly 0 mammoth and plenty of bitterness. It was time for politics, or as it was known back then, loud arguing with occasional pointing. Darrow, still crusty from his mammoth mud bath, cleared his throat. "We need a plan," he said, which in prehistoric terms meant, "I need to feel like I'm in charge again." Grell, with his ankle wrapped in what appeared to be damp rabbit hide and misplaced confidence, gestured with a stick. The mammoth was cursed. Probably your face scared it. Laughter. Even Kaa smirked, though she covered it with a fake cough. That was joke 1, and it landed better than the spears had. "Seriously," Darrow insisted. "If we don't change our ways, we'll keep eating bark stew and calling it soup." Kaa leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the firelight like 2 polished stones. "Then maybe don't chase giants like a beetle chasing thunder," which was basically her way of saying, "Cool your mammoth obsession." Politics around the fire weren't formal. There was no council, no talking stick, no vote. The loudest voice usually won until the oldest voice interrupted with something confusing enough to reset the conversation. Right on cue, old Heek, their clan's elderly matriarch/spiritual gambler, spoke up. "In my dream," she said slowly, "a tree grew teeth and bit the sun." Everyone paused. Oon looked terrified. Tuka whispered to Bren, "That's either a warning, or she's chewing mushrooms again." Heek's dreams were legendary, mostly because they never made sense, but were somehow always followed by minor disasters. Like that time she dreamed of flying goats, and 3 people fell off a ledge the next day. Darrow hesitated, then nodded solemnly, pretending he understood. "Yes, teeth, trees, symbolic." "Maybe," Grell offered. "It means the trees are tired of you rubbing your butt on them." Joke 2. Even Hake grinned. The fire crackled again, its glow bouncing off the clan's tired, smoke-smudged faces. Someone tossed on another stick slightly damp, which made it hiss like it disapproved. Oon was curled in Kaa's lap, half asleep, but still listening. Tuka sat cross-legged beside them, twiddling a bone between her fingers. Across the fire, Hearn sat staring into the flames with the intensity of someone who wasn't entirely sure whether the fire was alive or just whispering rude things. The conversation shifted, as it always did, from strategy to stories. Grell began with a tale of the giant elk that whispered secrets. No one believed it, but they liked the part where the elk insulted a man's cooking. Kay told the story of the time she fell into a river during mating season and was chased by lovesick frogs. It was, in her own words, a very wet mistake. Even Darrow got a laugh retelling how he once mistook a rock for a sleeping bear. It was dark. There was a lot of screaming. The rock did not move. Heek finally spoke again, her voice crackling like the wood. "Before the fire, we had no stories. Now the fire eats silence." It was oddly poetic, though no one wanted to tell her that out loud for fear she'd start chanting again. As the stories waned, the clan fell into the quieter part of the evening. Ritual grumbling. "My back hurts. My ankle is angry. Something bit me, and it's moving under my skin." Kaa, ever the problem solver, began passing around her homemade salve. a goopy mixture of ash, fermented roots, and what she once swore was cured squirrel essence. It didn't work, but it smelled terrible enough to distract from the pain. Tucker smeared some on her arms. Feels like sadness. Aye, means it's working, Carr said, and then the arguing returned, as if summoned by the scent. Bren wanted to move camp north, closer to the river. Carr thought that was stupid, because the river floods like a baby mammoth's bladder. Darrow said they should stay and hunt more. Grell said they should move where the mammoths weren't. At one point, Oon sleep muttered, "What if we eat the sun?" And somehow, that became the most interesting suggestion. Hearn finally spoke up. We could talk to the other clan, trade, share meat, silence. No one liked talking about the other clan. They lived maybe 2 hills over, rarely seen, often heard, and always suspicious. Their fire smoke curled into the sky some nights. Their scent, musky and earthy, would sometimes drift on the wind. Once, they left strange carvings on a rock near the creek, a spiral, a bird, and something that might have been a butt. Still, the idea of trading was appealing. Prehistoric grocery shopping, but politics being what they were: chaotic, informal, and heavily influenced by who had the biggest stick, the topic was shelved in favour of more immediate decisions, like whose turn it was to watch the fire, or who was stealing all the good sitting stones. Eventually, one by one, the clan dozed off. The fire softened to embers. The air cooled. Frogs began their croaking orchestra in the distance, and some insect somewhere started doing its best impression of a broken rattle. Tucker remained awake a little longer, staring at the stars. She wondered what those lights were. Spirits? Holes in the world? Or just bugs so high up you couldn't swat them? Whatever they were, they never moved. Not like mammoths. Not like people. She felt a weight settle beside her. Carr, silent, warm, and tired. Together, they watched the sky flicker, the fire fade, and the last ember of political ambitions smoulder into ash. In a world without leaders, laws, or slogans, sometimes the best decision was to just shut up and sleep. Love, in 10,000 BCE, wasn't candlelit or subtle. It didn't come in the form of poetry or carved hearts on trees. It came in grunts, sharp eye contact, and the occasional exchange of the least rotten termite mound you could find. Romantic gestures were earthy. As the sun climbed back into the sky the next day, tired. As usual, the clan was already waist-deep in the interpersonal jungle. No one had invented dating yet, so what unfolded was equal parts flirtation, wrestling, and strategic food sharing. Tuka, now officially of the mating age according to Heek's vague calendar of body hair and moon cycles, had caught the wandering gaze of Bren. He was fast, good at climbing, and had both eyebrows, which was increasingly rare among the clan. He'd recently managed to chase a bird into a tree hole and retrieve it still alive. That counted as a flex. This morning, Bren had accidentally left a plump beetle on Tuka's sleeping mat. Not squashed, not too crunchy, a real beauty. She saw it and tried not to smile, then stepped on it by mistake. Still, it was the thought that counted. Meanwhile, Cow was already monitoring the whole situation with the subtlety of a hawk watching a mouse romance a toaster. "Bren looks at you," she said, mouth full of tuba. Tuka shrugged. "He looks at birds too. Birds don't giggle. Tuka blinke. I don't giggle. You do now." The rules of courtship were vague, but heavily enforced by social energy. Gifts were good. Gifts with bugs, better. Shared grooming was basically second base. If someone sat behind you and picked lice out of your scalp without being asked, that was practically a marriage proposal. And lice were everywhere. You could measure affection in scratch time. Later that morning, while the others were sharpening tools or arguing about whether a tree could technically fall on purpose, Bren found Tucker by the stream. "You want this?" he asked, holding up a small yellow flower. It was mostly crushed, wilted, and probably poisonous. Tucker took it. "Nice colour." They sat together, feet dangling in the water, awkwardly silent. A nearby frog croaked in approval, or judgment. Hard to tell. Behind them, Oon splashed in the shallows, shouting at his own reflection. Romance might be complicated, But sibling chaos was universal. Elsewhere in the camp, Heek was preparing her infamous blessing paste. No one knew what was in it, only that it smelled like sour berries and regret. She claimed it made couples fertile, wise, and able to sleep through mosquito season, which frankly would be worth any price. Hearn, in a rare moment of curiosity, asked if he could have some. Heek stared at him for a full 10 seconds, then said, "You need something stronger." That was joke one. Everyone laughed except Hearn, who quietly sniffed his armpit to check. That afternoon, 2 other clan members, Na and Pell, got into a very physical disagreement over a shared blanket, and what had clearly been a mutual misunderstanding about whose turn it was. Their shouting eventually turned into grunting, which turned into wrestling, which turned into, well, something that required the kids to be sent away. Grell, watching the chaos unfold, muttered, "Ah, romance. The fine line between stabbing and snuggling. Joke 2. And it was disturbingly accurate. By sundown, the clan had divided into unofficial gossip groups. The elders grunted approvingly about good matches and strong hips. The children tried to copy what they'd seen by chasing each other and yelling, "Mine," over pine cones, and the adults just rolled their eyes and hoped nobody ended up with twin babies and a cave full of drama. Carr, always pragmatic, cornered Tuka near the cooking pit. "If you like him, show him," she said, handing over a handful of lice she'd just picked from her own scalp. "Use these." Tuka looked at the wriggling handful like they were diamonds, or at least the prehistoric equivalent. That evening, under the smoky sky, Tuka sidled up behind Bren and began picking at his hair. He flinched at first, then relaxed. This was it. The ancient dance, the root of future love songs and awkward couple selfies. No roses, no chocolates, just hands in hair and the quiet, parasitic intimacy of knowing someone would flick a louse off your neck without hesitation. Bren turned his head, caught her eye, and held it. Not a word, not a smile, but it was enough. In the background, Un ruined the moment by shouting, "They're kissing with fingers." Everyone laughed. Joke 3, unintentionally delivered by the loudest third wheel in the Stone Age. Later, as the fire glowed low and the stars returned to do their nightly judging, Tuka curled up next to Carr, who had seen enough generations of this to know how it played out. "You like him?" "I guess." Carr nodded. "He brought you a beetle. That's love." Tuka laughed. "You ever get a beetle?" "Your father gave me a handful of termites and a dead mouse." "Romantic. He also didn't die that winter." "Good catch." Love was never about flowers. It was about survival, warmth, and someone who could gather firewood without whining. And maybe, just maybe, a bit of lice-picking along the way. They smelled each other before they saw each other. The wind changed sometime mid-morning, carrying with it a musty scent of smoke, unfamiliar sweat, and something vaguely fishy. Not swamp fish, people fish, the other clan. It always started this way, olfactory diplomacy. One whiff and everyone sat up straighter, sniffed the air like startled meerkats, and glanced around suspiciously, wondering if that was them or just Grell's unwashed knees again. Tuka caught it too, not quite threatening. Not exactly friendly either. Just there, hanging like an uninvited spirit at the edge of their nostrils. Carr narrowed her eyes. "They're nearby." Darrow rubbed his jaw. "Maybe watching, waiting." "Oh." Heek muttered something about spirit shadows. But that was her usual contribution to any tension. Grell responded by sharpening his already pointless spear with a rock that was objectively too round to help. No one panicked. Yet, they just shifted into alert mode. A silent agreement to keep spears closer, to gather the kids into a tighter radius, and to speak in lower tones that sounded vaguely more important than usual. By midday, it wasn't just a scent, it was sound. A stick breaking in the wrong direction. A cough that wasn't familiar. And then, finally, the sight of them. 4 figures cresting the ridge, carrying no visible weapons, arms half raised in the international gesture for "Please don't kill us today." They weren't strangers. Not completely. These same faces had passed through once before seasons ago, trading dried fish, stone beads, and one extremely cursed-looking mask that no one wanted but everyone pretended to admire. They stood at a polite distance. One man, two women, and a hunched figure with a painted face that probably screamed shaman or grandparent or accidental decoration. Hard to say. Darrow stepped forward, hands open, chest out. Classic prehistoric power pose. Tuka watched from behind Car's shoulder as tension coiled silently in the air. Then the other group's leader, a tall man with a beard like wet moss, grunted a greeting. Friends. Well-ish. Car raised an eyebrow. That was prehistoric for, let's see where this goes before I spit. The ritual began. Slow, wordless. Objects passed back and forth like hesitant hugs made of wood and bones. The other clan gave them a handful of dried berries and something that may have been a petrified fish bladder. In return, Car offered a necklace made of bird bones and a handful of Car's secret dried root that made people either very calm or very gassy. Un, blissfully unaware of the tension, walked straight up to one of the strangers, stuck out his hand, and offered them a stick. They accepted it like it was a royal scepter. International diplomacy. Achieved by toddlers. As the two groups settled into a loose semicircle around the fire, the conversations remained cautious. Not about whether everyone hated it. Not about land too political. They spoke about food. Injuries. Bugs. The universal subjects. Then came the awkward part. The flirting. It started when one of the other clan's young women, with impressively symmetrical teeth, sat beside Bren and asked him something that sounded like, "Do you like frogs?" Tuka's eye twitched. Car leaned over and whispered, "You gonna fight her?" Tuka grunted. "Maybe." To be fair, Bren looked completely overwhelmed. He made a sound like a hiccup and pointed at a tree. The woman laughed. Tuka mentally counted to 7, and then bit her lip hard enough to taste anger. Meanwhile, Hearn had apparently bonded with their shaman over moss. They were sitting cross-legged, poking at each other's bundles of dried herbs like old friends comparing stamp collections. Tuka couldn't tell if they were discovering ancient secrets or trying to out-weird each other. Grell, of course, made it weird. "So, you guys got any mammoth meat lying around?" The other clan leader raised a single eyebrow. "You hunt mammoth?" "Once," Grell said. "It kicked me in the shin." Joke 1. The laugh that followed was strained, but at least it was laughter. Heek shuffled forward and began sniffing their shaman like a suspicious cat. No one stopped her. You didn't stop Heek. You just waited until she was done being mysterious or inappropriate. She declared, "You have dream feet." Silence. Then the other clan shaman smiled. "So do you." Weird shaman compliment exchange. Success. The day wore on, and while the air never quite lightened, it didn't tighten further either. Tension held, but gently, like two badgers cautiously sniffing the same hole, unsure whether to snuggle or scrap. Gifts exchanged, awkward small talk deployed, and eventually, food was shared, small fish, roasted roots, and something green and slimy that nobody wanted but everyone pretended to enjoy. Tuka sat near Bren, who was now obviously trying to make it up to her by carving a tiny animal into a bit of wood. It had 4 legs and no face. She loved it anyway. Joke 2. "It's you," he said. After a bad hunt, Tuka chuckled and flicked his ear. As the sun dipped lower, the other clan prepared to leave. No promises were made, no treaties signed, but heads nodded, hands touched shoulders, and nobody died. Which, for two groups of highly suspicious, highly underfed people, was a solid diplomatic success. The strangers vanished over the ridge, their smell lingering like a slightly better version of the clan's usual funk. A few minutes of silence passed. Darrow exhaled. "Could have gone worse." Grell scratched his beard. "We didn't trade Un." "That's a win." Un, who had fallen asleep inside a tree stump, snorted loudly. Car looked at Tuka. "You're not allowed to fight the pretty ones." Tuka rolled her eyes. "I didn't fight her. I just stared very hard." "That counts." As the clan settled in again, the sky bruised into twilight, and the fire welcomed their tired limbs. They were still alone in the world, but a little less so. Somewhere out there, Other people were poking fires, picking lice, and flirting badly. And that, somehow, made it all feel less boring. Joke 3 landed just as the fire popped. Heek looked up and muttered, "Next time, I want their shaman. Mine smells like goat." Elder Broll had never been the graceful type. His legs had always moved like two sticks loosely strapped to a rock, and he fell down more often than a goat in a windstorm. But this time, it was different. He had tripped over a root near the stream while inspecting a suspiciously shaped stone, which turned out to just be a lumpy rock, not the sacred turtle egg he had confidently announced. The fall wasn't dramatic. No yelling, just a soft oof, and then a very loud silence. When Kaa and Darrow found him, he was sitting awkwardly on the ground, one leg bent like a question mark, face pale, jaw tight. Broll didn't cry out. He was far too stubborn for that. But when Darrow touched his ankle, and it moved like an undercooked squirrel bone, Broll's whole face did a thing that resembled a silent sneeze and visible trauma. That was how the clan's only half-useful storyteller became the patient of their self-declared healer, Pell. Now, Pell wasn't trained. No one was trained. Medical school hadn't even been invented. She'd once accidentally invented a very effective insect repellent by mixing tree sap and mud, then forgot how she made it. But she had an aura of, "I got this," and smelled like fermented confidence. As Broll was carried back on a makeshift litter made of sticks, fur, and whatever dignity he had left, Pell gathered her tools, moss, spider silk, bone splints, and a gourd full of something that hissed when opened. Nobody asked what was in it. It was better not to know. The entire clan circled around as she examined the leg. Oh, that was prehistoric for, "This is probably broken, but let's act like I know what I'm doing." Kaa handed her a length of sinew, and Pell began wrapping the leg. She spoke to Broll the whole time, not to comfort him, but to distract him with conspiracy theories about glowing frogs. "I once saw one under the moonlight," she whispered. "Eyes like fire, watched me pee." Broll grunted in pain. Maybe laughter. Hard to tell. Tuka watched, fascinated, and slightly horrified. She was too young to be a healer, too old to ignore it. She leaned in. "Does moss actually help?" Pell didn't even look up. "Helps me feel helpful." Honesty was refreshing. By sunset, Broll's leg was splinted, wrapped and elevated on a carefully selected healing rock. Heek insisted that the rock had spiritual properties because it had once crushed a bird. Darrow said that didn't count. Heek threatened to sneeze on his soup. Joke 1. For the next several days, Broll became the clan's unwilling centre of attention. The children were fascinated. They brought him bugs, twigs, and one squirrel skull to cheer him up. Broll thanked them with elaborate, mostly made-up tales about his injury. "Was fighting a wolf," he whispered to Kun, eyes wide. "Really?" "Number. Tripped over my own foot." This, strangely, made Un respect him more. Kaa and Tuka took turns bringing Broll food. Mostly soft things, mushed roots, lizard stew, and one particularly adventurous soup made from snail water and hope. Broll winced every time, but ate it anyway. Pell, for her part, continued treating him like a mixture of sacred relic and disappointing houseplant. She checked his splint daily, applied new mixtures of herbs that got progressively weirder, and muttered things like, "If he starts seeing lights, that's either healing or brainworms." Morale, though, was surprisingly high. It turns out, having a wounded elder lying around gave the rest of the clan something to do, something to talk about. They debated how to better avoid injuries. "Don't walk," said Grell. "Float like ghost," suggested Heek. "Look down more often," added Tuka, the only suggestion that made actual sense. They discussed new materials for splints. Bren suggested fish bones. Hearn suggested spirit vines, which turned out to be regular vines he tied into knots and pretended were magical. No one was impressed. Still, the healing process brought out a tenderness the clan didn't often show. Each member contributed in small ways. Kaa adjusted Broll's bedding. Darrow kept the fire closer at night, and even Hearn built a tiny fence of twigs around the healing rock to protect his aura. Joke 2. It actually became a clan-wide bit. "Don't step past the aura fence," they'd say. You'll stub your karma. Broll, for all his grumbling, seemed to enjoy the attention. He told increasingly exaggerated versions of his injury each night around the fire. Fell while chasing a mountain lion, jumped off a cliff to save a child, got kicked by a jealous mammoth. Each version got more applause. Tuka swore he was secretly enjoying being a couch potato wrapped in moss. One night, as the stars blinked lazily overhead and the fire hummed low, Broll asked Pell, "Will I walk again?" She looked at him, squinted like she was communing with an invisible salamander, and nodded solemnly. "Maybe. Depends if your leg remembers how." It was both comforting and completely unhelpful, but it worked. Joke 3 came that night, from Heek, as she shuffled over to check on Broll and sniffed his splint. "It's healing," she declared, "or it's turning into a root." Everyone laughed except Broll, who glanced down in mild panic. Weeks passed. The leg grew less swollen. Broll started testing it, poking the ground with a stick and trying to balance. The first time he stood, everyone held their breath. He wobbled. He groaned. He sat right back down. "Progress," Pell said cheerfully. Healing wasn't fast, but it was happening, slowly, steadily, and surrounded by the strange, warm persistence of a clan that didn't have doctors, insurance, or wheelchairs, but had a whole lot of stubborn love. Broll would walk again, maybe limp, maybe wobble, but the clan would still follow behind him, just in case the sacred turtle egg showed up again. It began, as most disasters do, with curiosity and fire. Oon, our fearless 5-year-old with the attention span of a gnat and the energy of a caffeinated squirrel, had discovered something dangerous. Friction. More specifically, what happened when you rubbed 2 dry sticks together fast enough and shouted, "Look," at the same time. Tuka found him crouched behind the brush pile, face smudged with soot, eyes wide with excitement, holding what could only be described as a flaming twig of doom, his prized possession, a hollowed-out tortoise shell, filled with dry moss and suspicious ambition, smouldered beside him like a tiny volcano preparing for its dramatic debut. "Oon," she hissed, already running. Too late. The moss puffed into flames with a triumphant whoosh and ignited a trail of dry leaves like a fuse made of bad decisions. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos, shouting, and everyone suddenly remembering why fire was both a blessing and a complete jerk. Kaa stomped the ground with her fur-wrapped feet. Darrow flung dirt with both hands like an angry toddler at a sandcastle contest, and Hearn tried to spit on it, an effort that was more dramatic than effective, given he'd barely drunk any water all morning. Grell, dragging his still sore leg behind him, joined the battle late, yelling, "Stop! Fire! Stop!" as if the flames were going to respond to verbal reasoning. Eventually, the blaze was smothered with a combination of dirt, sweat, and a slightly heroic amount of panic. The brush pile now resembled a pile of regret. Smoke curled into the air, thick and judgmental. Everyone stared at Oon. He looked up, face innocent, eyebrows slightly singed. "It worked," he said. Joke 1, delivered with childlike sincerity and perfectly timed after near disaster. No one laughed. Not yet. Kaa grabbed him gently but firmly by the wrist. The universal prehistoric gesture for, "You are now going to learn a very serious lesson through consequences and mild fear." She led him straight to Heek. Heek, perched on her usual suspiciously soft rock, looked at the smouldering pile, then at Oon. "So, you like fire?" Oon nodded. "You want to sleep near it tonight?" He paused, reconsidering. Heek leaned closer. "Fire likes to eat small boys who don't listen." That was half joke, half honest folklore. Kaa pulled Tuka aside. "He's got the fire stick brain." "Like the old stories?" Tuka asked. "Exactly. Curiosity, mischief, and zero sense of scale." A clan-wide meeting was held that evening. Not a formal one, there were no stone podiums or microphones. Just everyone sitting around the fire, the controlled one, in a circle of barely contained frustration. Darrow began, "Today we nearly cooked ourselves." Grell nodded. "Thanks to our tiny fire god." "Oh." Oon sat beside Kaa, chin in hands, thoroughly shamed and, secretly, a little impressed with himself. The group discussed new rules. No fire-making unless supervised. No playing near dry moss. No carrying around your own personal torch, even if you named it Mr. Hot Stick, Bren added. And no hiding fire in animal skulls. Again, everyone turned to Hearn. What? That was once, he said defensively. And it was barely a goat. Joke too. It earned some chuckles and broke the tension. Tucker volunteered to keep Oon busy for the next few days. Fire had awakened something in him. Something restless, crackling, and potentially explosive. He needed tasks, supervised ones, preferably involving water. The next morning she assigned him very important mud work, which was code for sit in the stream and play with globs of wet dirt until you forget about combustion. It worked, mostly. Later, Oon came running back into camp with arms full of wet clay, shouting, "I made a bowl!" The bowl was mostly a lump. It collapsed under its own confusion, but it was progress. Ki took the opportunity to teach him about fire's gentler side. She sat him down and showed him how to use it for warmth, for cooking, for warding off bugs. "Fire is strong," she said. "Like mammoth. If you poke it too much, it stomps." Oon nodded solemnly. That night, a new bedtime ritual was born. Before sleep, Oon was allowed to sit near the fire not too close and poke it once with a stick. Just once. It gave him a sense of control, or at least the illusion of it. Heek, never missing a chance to add flair, began telling stories of the child who stole fire from the sky. According to her, this mythical child had turned his hair to smoke, his fingers to coal, and his dreams to steam. Oon listened, wide-eyed. "Was that me?" he asked. Heek shrugged. "Might be, or it might be that squirrel over there." Joke 3. Even the squirrel looked offended. Over time, the fire incident became part of clan lore. The Day of the Small Blaze, they called it. Coon was dubbed Fire Stick, in half-joking, half-terrified tones. It would likely stick forever. Nicknames were like that, unearned, permanent, and always slightly embarrassing. But the clan learned something too. About fire. About children. About the thin red line between wonder and disaster. They reinforced their firing with stones. They moved the kindling pile farther from the sleeping mats. And they paid more attention to what the kids were doing with dry grass. That night, as the fire crackled safely in its new pit, Tuka leaned over to Oon and asked, "Still want to make your own fire?" He looked thoughtful. "Maybe, but I'll ask first." "Good. Pause. But if it's really important..." "Oon. Okay. Peace was restored. Eyebrows grew back, and the fire, now safely tamed, flickered like a sleepy animal, mysterious, powerful, and occasionally ridiculous. The famine didn't arrive all at once. It tiptoed in, disguised as smaller things. First, the tubers got bitter. Then the birds stopped nesting in their usual trees. Then the stream dried up just enough that the fish disappeared, and the mud turned to cracked mosaic tiles of disappointment. One morning, K.A. poked at the breakfast pile and declared, "This is not a pile. It's an insult." The children were chewing on roasted bark shavings, pretending they were crunchy treats, and Broll, now hobbling again on his almost healed leg, tasted a squirrel stew and politely set his bowl down, saying, "I'm not hungry, actually," which in ancient times was code for this taste like disappointment, marinated in shoe. Darrow stood, stretched his aching back, and announced what everyone already knew. "We have to move." Migration wasn't rare. It was just miserable, like being evicted by nature for no reason other than existing. The clan had done it before, sometimes in search of food, sometimes to escape floods, once because Heek insisted a rock gave her bad future dreams. But this one felt heavier. The food was gone, and this time they didn't know where more was. They packed slowly, tiredly. Car wrapped her tools in a bundle of fur. Tuka stuffed her few possessions, sharp stones, a carved wooden animal from Bren, and a handful of moss she insisted was lucky, into a sling. Heek insisted on bringing her rock. "The dream rock stays close," she warned. "It has moss on it," Darrow pointed out. "Yes," she hissed. "To listen better. Joke 1, maybe." Though no one laughed, the walk began under a grim sky. that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or just sulk. The earth felt harder than usual, the wind more sarcastic. Even Un, usually bouncing along like a flea on fire, was unusually quiet, dragging his feet through the dust like a tragic poet. Broll limped beside Grell, each step accompanied by a grunt and a muttered insult about rocks that looked like flat ground but weren't. By midday, the sun was high, the water skins were low, and everyone's mood had collapsed into a collective grumble. Carr turned to Darrow. "Where are we going exactly?" Darrow squinted ahead. "Where the birds went. Keblinkle. You've been watching the birds?" "Some of them. And they told you this direction?" One winked at me. "Joke too." That time, Tucker laughed. Just once. Quietly. But it helped. The clan trudged on. There was no road, no map, no helpful signs pointing toward food or comfort. Just dirt, rocks, a few unfortunate hills, and feet. So many tired, blistered, unappreciated feet. They passed through dry thickets where every bush seemed to whisper, "Don't bother." An old elk skeleton lay half buried near a riverbed, its bones clean, its story over. They avoided a hornet's nest barely, and watched as Hearn tried to wave them away using the power of positive energy. He got stung 5 times. "Nature doesn't like optimism," Carr muttered, handing him a wad of crushed leaves. By the 3rd day, exhaustion had become a language, a look, a shared grimace. The children stopped asking, "How much farther?" and started sleeping on their feet. Even the lice seemed less enthusiastic. They reached a patch of woods, where the trees at least offered shade. There, they collapsed. Not camped, collapsed, bodies scattered like dropped tools. Even Heek lay down without a single prophetic grunt. Tuka sat beside Bren, whose lips were dry and whose normally enthusiastic hair now looked like a frightened bush. "We'll find something soon," she said. Even though she wasn't sure, he nodded, too tired to argue. Carr chewed a strip of root and looked into the distance. "We're still alive. That's the most boring achievement I've ever heard," Darrow replied. "Joke 3. Carr smiled anyway. The next morning, the air smelled. Different. Sweet. Faintly wet. Carr sniffed. "That's water." They followed the scent, moving faster now, despite their aching bodies, driven by the hint of moisture, in a world that had recently tasted like sand and regret. Eventually the trees thinned, and a valley opened before them. A ribbon of green snaked through the middle grass. Real grass, with a sluggish but genuine stream crawling through it. Birds chirped without sarcasm. Bugs buzzed with enthusiasm. It felt impossibly like hope. The clan stood in silence, staring. Tears welled in Broll's eyes. "I'm not crying, my leg is leaking." Heek reached down, grabbed a handful of dirt, and licked it. "Okay," Carr said. "Why? Tastes fertile." Darrow stepped into the clearing. "We'll rest here. A few days. Just until we're stronger." He meant it. But they all heard what he didn't say out loud. Maybe longer. Maybe a lot longer. Tuka dropped her bundle and lay back on the grass. It was cool. Soft. Forgiving. Un danced through the weeds, arms wide, shouting, "Food air! The air is made of food!" Close enough. The clan spread out, each member claiming a small patch of comfort under the sun, beside the water, within reach of whatever this new land offered. They were still hungry, still tired, but for now, they weren't walking. And that felt like winning. New land, new problems. Yes, the valley had water. Yes, it had green things. But it also had swamp. Not a charming cartoon swamp. A hot, sticky, bug-thick mess of mud, buzzing wings and suspiciously watchful eyes blinking just beneath the surface. "This," Grell announced, "is the armpit of the world." Joke 1. But no one laughed. Probably because something was biting their ankles. The clan had moved closer to the stream that looped lazily through the valley. What looked from a distance like a peaceful waterway turned out to be a series of shallow, sluggish puddles connected by mud and mutual resentment. It didn't take long for someone to slip in. That someone was, of course, Hearn. He stepped into what he thought was firm ground and immediately disappeared up to his waist in swamp gunk. When they pulled him out, he was covered in a thick layer of green-brown ooze that smelled like something had died in there. Possibly several somethings. Possibly yesterday. "I've become one with nature," he said, eyes wide. "You've become a warning sign," Car muttered, wiping slime off her leg with a fern. It was in this charming bogland that the clan encountered their next great trial: bugs. Not the cute, dry kind you could fry and pretend were snacks. No, these were wet, buzzing, relentless creatures bred in the worst dreams of itchy men. They bit, they stung, they crawled into ears. Oon screamed when he woke up with a beetle in his nose. Heek insisted it was a blessing. "The swamp spirit has sniffed you." Oon insisted it tickled. Desperate for relief, Pell began experimenting with swamp materials: leaves, mud, fish slime. One day she smeared herself with a paste made from mashed berries and pond scum. The mosquitoes still bit her, but at least she looked terrifying. Then came Hearn's contribution. He waddled into camp, dripping with enthusiasm, holding a clump of something unmentionable. "I found a new potion," he said, beaming. "What is it?" Tuka asked. "Crocodile-poop." Silence. "Why?" "I saw a crocodile covered in it, and it didn't have any bugs on it." There was a long pause. Then Car, ever the pragmatist, took a whiff. "Disgusting," she declared. "Give me some." Thus began the brief, unfortunate era of crocodile-poop sunscreen. Everyone tried it reluctantly. To everyone's shock, it actually worked. The bugs seemed to flee in disgust, or maybe respect. Either way, the clan stopped scratching for once. Heek called it a miracle. Grell called it stinky victory. Tuka called it rock bottom. But they used it, because smelling like a reptile's bathroom was better than bleeding from 10,000 bug bites. Of course, the swamp had more than bugs. There were leeches. One attached itself to Darrow's thigh, prompting him to scream loud enough to startle a nearby heron into laying an egg. Heek claimed it was a sign of fertility. Darrow claimed it was the worst experience of his life. There were also things with eyes, things that slid beneath the surface and made ripples without explanation. One night, Tuka saw something move in the water. She swore it smiled. No one else saw it. Car said she was just tired. Heek nodded solemnly and said, "Yes, the wet ones watch." Comforting. Despite the swamp's charm, the clan adapted. They built sleeping platforms out of branches to avoid the wet ground. They hung their packs from trees. They designated one area for pooping far, far away, and another for washing off the poop smell. Hearn, emboldened by his poop breakthrough, began mixing new potions: slug slime with bark ash, ground snail shell with frog spit. None of them did anything. Some made people itchy in entirely new ways, but he was trying. They also found new food. Fish with odd teeth that tasted like algae and oil. Berries that made Oon hiccup uncontrollably. Tuka discovered a mushroom that glowed faintly at night. She called it the moon bun. Heek tried to marry it. She was told no. Joke too. Delivered with absolute sincerity. At one point, they stumbled upon a patch of strange fruit growing on low bushes. The fruit was pale, soft, and smelled like wet socks. Naturally, everyone insisted someone else try it first. Car, brave and bored, took a bite. "Huh," she said. "Huh? Good or huh? Bad?" Darrow asked. "Who? Interesting. It wasn't deadly, just unpleasant," which was now their standard for edible. Despite the muck and the mystery, something unexpected happened in the swamp. They bonded, struggling together in grossness, in slime, in shared stench. These were the ties that truly bind. One evening, as they sat around the fire, now raised on a rock slab above water level, Car looked around and said, "This is the worst place we've ever liked." And it was true, because it was also the first place they'd laughed this much in weeks. Oon told stories now. Terrible, made-up ones about swamp creatures with long arms and terrible table manners. Bren started carving little swamp gods out of driftwood and hiding them in people's sleeping mats. Tuka sang songs badly about leeches falling in love. Even Heek got in on the fun. One night, She held up a bowl of swamp stew, sniffed it, and said, "I've seen worse in my dreams." Joke 3. Half delirious, fully accepted. They stayed in the swamp longer than expected. Maybe because they were tired. Maybe because they were finally comfortable with being uncomfortable. They knew they couldn't stay forever. Nothing gold, or green and slimy, can last. But for a few days, in the stink and buzz of their weird boggy nowhere, they found something almost like happiness. And crocodile poop. Lots and lots of crocodile poop. The shaman said it was time to see the world sideways. That's how Heek described her ritual preparations: vague, cryptic, and vaguely threatening. She'd spent the better part of the day humming into jars, grinding dried frogs into dust, and asking everyone what their spiritual temperature was. "Mine's itchy," Can answered helpfully. Heek nodded. "That's the sacred kind." They had stayed in the swamp longer than expected. Maybe too long. Even with crocodile poop sunscreen and elevated fire pits, something in the air was turning stale, restless. The dreams were getting weird, even for this clan. Kaa mentioned she kept dreaming of teeth falling from the sky. Darrow swore he saw stars blinking in rhythm. Tucker had begun waking up mid-sentence. So, when Heek announced it was time for a vision ritual, no one argued. They all just instinctively brought her weird stuff. Mushrooms, feathers, fish bones, and one still glowing moonbun mushroom Tucker had saved just in case of emotional emergencies. Heek nodded solemnly. "Perfect. Now we chew." That night, the clan sat in a loose circle near the fire. Not the usual bedtime circle, but a slightly more suspicious one. The kind where no one was sure if they were about to become wise or deeply uncomfortable. Heek handed out portions of her sacred stew. It looked like soup. It tasted like someone tried to boil a sadness. But the point wasn't flavor. The point was the trip. One by one, the clan sipped, and then waited, and then blinked, and then, slowly, gently, the world began to slide sideways. Tuka was the first to notice the stars had rearranged themselves. They were now spelling something. Maybe a name, maybe a warning, or possibly just a long, celestial fart. Un giggled. Kaa was staring at her hand like it had just confessed to murder. "Why are you so big?" she whispered to her thumb. Bren tried to hug a tree and fell into it. "It's breathing," he insisted. Grell, who'd only taken half a dose, just to be safe, claimed he saw a mammoth dancing in the firelight, doing something that might have been the worm. The visions came quick, like dreams on fast forward. Tuka saw herself made of leaves, then stone, then something that looked suspiciously like soup. She reached for Kaa, but her arms kept growing longer, then turning into snakes. She wasn't afraid, just annoyed. Kaa saw her childhood, but everyone had fish heads. "Not my worst memory," she mumbled. Darrow sat completely still, eyes wide, whispering the word circle over and over again, as if trying to solve a riddle with no punchline. Hearn disappeared for a full hour. When he returned, he was covered in dirt, carrying a perfectly round rock, and announced, "This is me now." Joke 1. Sort of. Everyone was too busy experiencing spiritual confusion to laugh. Heek, meanwhile, stood in the center of it all, arms raised, chanting into the smoke. Her voice had taken on a new tone, somewhere between prophet and raccoon. She pointed skyward. "The air has bones tonight." The fire pulsed. Or maybe everyone just thought it did. The ritual lasted for hours. Time warped. Language crumbled. At some point, Tuka swore she had a conversation with the moon. It was very one-sided. The moon was shy. Eventually, the effects wore off. Slowly, the clan returned to their bodies like they'd been out on rental. The world clicked back into place. Fuzzy at first, then sharp. Like waking up from a nap you didn't know you were taking, inside a bear. They were quiet. Not out of fear. Just awe, confusion, slight nausea. Tuka stared into the fire. "I think I saw the beginning of everything." Kaa nodded. "I saw a tree give birth to the wind." Un proudly announced, "I became a frog and married a lizard." Darrow wiped his face and mumbled, Circle. Hearn was still hugging his round rock. We're bonded now. They all lay back eventually, dazed and blinking. The stars no longer danced. The fire just flickered normally again, as if embarrassed by what it had hosted. Heek sat calmly by the flames, stirring the ashes with a stick. "Well?" Carr asked. "What did it mean?" Heek shrugged. "Probably nothing, but maybe everything. Joke too, and possibly the best one yet. The ritual hadn't given them answers. No grand revelation, no spirit messenger with a clear to-do list, but it had given them perspective. Connection. A sense that there was more than walking, hunting, bug bites, and bark stew. Even Broll, who'd skipped the ritual due to a bad gut feeling, nodded in approval. "You all look like you saw your own skeletons." "We did," Tucker muttered. "Mine was making soup. The next morning, things felt calmer, lighter." Tucker sat beside Carr and said, "I don't know what I saw, but it felt important." Carr nodded. "We don't need to understand everything. We just need to walk better now." They all felt it, a subtle shift, like their brains had stretched in strange directions, then returned, just slightly roomier. Even the swamp didn't feel as suffocating. The bugs buzzed the same, the mud squelched the same, but somehow it didn't bother them quite as much. Oon picked up a frog and whispered, "Don't worry. I remember our wedding." The frog blinked once, then peed on him. Joke 3. And so, with clearer minds, dirtier faces, and at least one new emotional bond with a rock, the clan began to prepare for the next leg of their journey. They hadn't found enlightenment, but they definitely found something. They didn't mean to find the cave. That's how most sacred things happen completely by accident, often while trying to pee privately. Carr had wandered off to relieve herself at a respectful distance from camp. The swamp was behind them now, and the land had softened into rockier hills, with fewer bugs and more breathable air. She picked her way across some loose stones, eyeing a narrow crevice in the cliffside. A cool draught wafted out, carrying a scent both old and dry, like the inside of a forgotten drum. She leaned in. The darkness was inviting, not threatening, just curious. "Cave," she muttered. Back at camp, she returned wide-eyed. "There's a hole," she told Darrow. "Congratulations," he said. "We all have one. Joke 1. A bad one." But Grell snorted. "No, a cave," she clarified, with air that smells like dust and memory. That earned attention. So, the next morning, the whole clan went. Because prehistoric logic dictated that if one person found a mysterious cave, obviously everyone had to go crawl inside it together. They approached the cliffside cautiously, the children pressed between adults like squishy luggage. Tucker held Oon's hand not because he was scared, but because he had a tendency to sprint into anything that looked like a mouth. The opening was narrow and low. They stooped, shuffled, grunted. A bat farted near Darrow's head. He nearly screamed, but then the passage opened into a wide chamber, and everyone went silent at the same time. The walls were alive, not with movement, but with colour. Shapes, lines, thousands of handprints, some red, some black, some white. Palms splayed like ancient graffiti, reaching from the past as if to say, "We were here, and we had fingers." Tucker gasped. A cave of hands. Oon raised his own, comparing. His was smaller than every single one. Carr stepped forward and gently pressed her palm against a red print. The size matched. The age did not. "These people lived before us," she whispered. "Maybe long before." Heek immediately claimed to remember them. "That one was a friend," she said, pointing at a particularly smudged print. "Sure," Grell muttered. "Back when you were just a thought." The silence wasn't heavy. It was respectful. Everyone looked, and no one spoke for a while. Some of the prints had dots around them. Others had animals drawn nearby: horses, bulls, deer, even what might have been a very confused pig. Tucker walked deeper, following a trail of faint paintings. One showed a hunt. Tiny human figures with bows and spears chasing a massive creature with too many legs. Possibly a mammoth. Possibly someone with artistic freedom and no peer review. She turned to Bren. Why would they make this? Maybe they were bored. No, it feels like more than that. Maybe they wanted to be remembered. She paused. Do you think they still are? He shrugged. We're here. Deeper in, Heek found a second chamber. It was smaller, but the walls shimmered oddly in the torchlight, not with colour but texture. The stone had been carved. Spirals, lines, circles, a story written in symbols no one could read. Magic, Hearn whispered. Or a to-do list, Kerr replied. Joke too. They stayed for hours. No one wanted to leave. It wasn't comfort. It was presence. The feeling that they weren't the first to feel lost, or hungry, or in love with fire. Tuka pressed her hand against the wall. Then she dipped her palm in charcoal and made her own mark. Her handprint. Her story, now part of theirs. Oon followed with both hands, smacking them on the rock with the enthusiasm of a mammoth in a mud puddle. Carr hesitated, then did the same. One slow press of her palm. Darrow, Grell, Pell, even Heek all followed. Even Broll, who grumbled the whole way but still marked his territory like a reluctant cat. They made a fire in the mouth of the cave that night. Not inside it didn't feel right. The entrance flickered with their shadows, dancing on the walls like old ghosts with new moves. They didn't speak much over dinner. The roasted tubers were dry, the fish chewy, but no one complained. Everyone was still thinking about the hands. I feel small, Tuka said, staring into the flames. Good, Carr said. Means your head's not too big. They laughed gently, quietly, the kind of laugh you make in a temple, even if no one's told you it is one. Later, Bren attempted interpretive dance to describe one of the cave paintings. It involved a lot of hopping and occasional bird noises. Darrow declared it deeply upsetting. Joke 3. They stayed near the cave for 3 days. No one said why. It just felt necessary. In that time, Oon found a fossil shaped like a tooth and claimed it as his spirit pet. He fed it grass. Heek taught Tuka a chant she only half understood. Carr collected smooth stones and arranged them in a spiral near the cave's entrance, just in case the old ones were still watching. When they left, the hands stayed behind, watching, reaching, whispering, nothing and everything. Tuka didn't look back, not because she didn't care, because she knew the cave would remember them now, too. The storm arrived without warning, like a hungry god tripping over the horizon. It began with wind, not the gentle kind that tickles leaves into laughter, but the sharp slap of air that made you turn your head and squint. Then came the sound low and grumbling, like the sky had indigestion. Oon declared that it was cloud monsters arguing, which, to be fair, wasn't completely off. By mid-afternoon, the sky had bruised to a deep grey. The wind howled like a very opinionated wolf, and the first fat drops of rain began smacking the earth with the urgency of someone trying to get a fire started using only shame. We need cover, Darrow barked, grabbing his spear like it was going to shield him from moisture. They moved quickly, packs slung over shoulders, firestones tucked into hides, children bundled like edible burritos. Carr scanned the rising hills and spotted a ridge not far off, a dark slash along the stone. There! She shouted, pointing. Cave! Again? Grell groaned. Is every problem solved by a cave now? Yes, Carr said flatly. The rain hit harder as they ran. Mud splashed. Hair stuck to faces. Someone slipped, probably Hearn. By the time they reached the cave entrance, they were drenched, shivering, and increasingly suspicious that the sky held a grudge. This cave was smaller than the last. No painted hands, no echoing chambers, just dry rock, a ceiling that didn't leak much, and a slope at the back that looked like it could swallow small people if you weren't careful. Cozy, Pell muttered. They piled in and took inventory. 1/2 soggy fire bundle, 2 waterlogged furs, 3 angry toddlers, one of them technically a raccoon, long story, and 0 dry kindling. Darrow attempted to start a fire using aggressive optimism and 2 damp sticks. It did not work. Meanwhile, the rain picked up. The sound on the cave's stone lip was thunderous, like the sky was applauding itself. A flash of lightning lit the space white, followed by thunder that made everyone involuntarily hiccup in fear. Then, a chirp. A small, ridiculous chirp. Oon looked down at his feet. A tiny, shivering rodent barely larger than a squirrel fart had scampered in, and was now staring at him with big, wet eyes. "It followed us," he whispered. "It's my baby." Car, currently wringing out her hair with both fists, glanced over. "That's not your baby. That's a rat. It chose me. I'm not raising another one." The rodent scurried behind Oon's leg and nestled in his satchel. He beamed. "It's a storm mouse. Joke 1. Delivered with soggy joy. Urs. Past." The fire finally caught, thanks to Pell sacrificing one of her dried root bundles and a desperate prayer to whatever spirit managed ignition. They huddled around it like moths, arms wrapped around knees, steam rising from their backs. Grell tried to lighten the mood with a story about the time he got stuck in a tree to escape bees. "Turns out bees climb," he explained. And Judge, Heek, who had been eerily quiet, suddenly declared, "Storms bring change. Also floods," Darrow muttered, eyeing the rising water outside. Tuka sat beside Carr, both of them staring into the flames. "Do you think the cave will hold?" Carr didn't answer immediately. Then, "I think we'll hold." The storm raged on. Wind screamed like an insulted spirit. The fire guttered low. Someone farted and tried to blame the wind. It wasn't the wind. Then came the creak. From deeper inside the cave, everyone froze. "Please let that be your storm mouse," Bren whispered. Oon looked down. The mouse was still asleep, curled in a knot of fur and crumbs. Carr stood, torch in hand. "Stay." "Oh, no way," Tuka said, grabbing a rock. "I'm coming." Together, Carr, Tuka and Darrow crept toward the back of the cave. The slope dipped down into darkness, the air turning colder with each step. The creaking grew louder then. Suddenly, a skittering. "Spirit?" Carr called. Pause. And then, a badger. A very large, very wet badger bolted past them with all the subtlety of a boulder. It hissed at Grell, tripped over Heek's gourd, and dove straight out into the rain. Silence followed. Everyone looked at Grell. "I think I just got spiritually mugged." Joke 2. The laughter was half relieved, half hysterical. They blocked the tunnel with rocks, just in case more unexpected roommates arrived. The fire was rebuilt. Blankets were shared. Even Heek snuggled closer to Carr for warmth, muttering something about the badger omen and teeth dreams. That night, sleep came in waves interrupted by thunder, cold drafts, and occasional drips. But somehow, they endured. In the middle of it all, Tuka woke with a start. She wasn't sure why. Then she realized Oon had tucked the storm mouse into her hair. It was snoring. She left it there. By morning, the storm had softened. Rain still fell, but gently now, like the sky was embarrassed by its tantrum. The world was wet, steaming, and glistening with new life. The clan stepped outside slowly, blinking into the pale light. The land had changed. Trees were down, paths washed away. But the air smelled cleaner. The sky was wider, and for once no one was arguing. Oon held the mouse high. "She says it's safe now." "She?" Ka asked. "Yes. Her name is Crip." "Crip?" She told me. Tuka looked around at the wreckage of trees, the sparkling leaves, the river that now cut a fresh, unexpected curve through the valley. "Storms do bring change," she said. Heek nodded. "Also rodents." Joke 3. Nailed it. The world wasn't safer now. Or easier. But it had shifted, and the clan had survived together, wet, slightly mouldy, and a little wiser. They wouldn't forget this cave, or the badger, or the sound the fire made when it almost went out but didn't. Sometimes shelter was just a rock and a hole in the earth. But sometimes it was everything. The deer stood completely still, not frozen in fear, not mid-step, just still, like it had been painted into the forest, part of the trees, the moss, the hush. Even the wind paused to watch. Tucker froze too. She didn't breathe, didn't blink. Her spear hung weightless in her hand, loose and steady. Bren, just behind her, crouched low with a bow carved from yew and strung with tendon. The rest of the clan was deeper in the woods, spread out, quiet, drifting through the trees like half-forgotten thoughts. This was a rare moment. One that didn't happen when you were hunting mammoth or chasing angry boars or trying to fish a squirrel out of a hole. This was a gift, a deer who had chosen to pause in the middle of its escape. Maybe it was tired. Maybe it was testing them. Maybe it had also had a long week and wanted a peaceful ending. Tuka didn't move. The spear in her hand now felt like a question. Do we take, or do we let go? The forest watched. Sunlight slanted through the trees in blades of gold and green. The ground was soft under her knees. Her breath, when she finally let it go, was as quiet as mist. Bren looked at her, waiting. She met his eyes and nodded. But not go. Just wait. The deer blinked slowly, as if understanding something wordless between them. Then it turned and walked, not ran back into the trees. And just like that, the spell broke. Bren exhaled. That was the most intense not hunt of my life. Joke one, whispered with reverence. They stood together for a moment, surrounded by silence that hummed like a song they weren't allowed to sing. Then they turned back. The hunt that day didn't go badly. They brought down 2 birds, found a burrow full of plump, unhappy rodents, and unearthed a few edible roots Carr had previously declared only for emergencies or when you hate yourself. But no deer. Still, no one complained. When they returned to camp, Darrow raised an eyebrow. So, nothing? Tuka shrugged. We saw one. It saw us back. Carr, peeling a root with her teeth, nodded like this made sense. The kind of deer that tells you you're not ready. Alzari. Un interrupted by loudly informing everyone that Crip the storm mouse had developed an allergy to certain types of moss. He was building her a bed made of pine needles and dreams. She squeaked in protest. The rest of the clan sat together under the new canopy they'd woven from reeds and sticks, the storm now behind them, the land still damp but blooming. Their recent experiences hung over them like steam soft, hard to hold, but everywhere. Later that evening, Carr called the clan to gather. We need to talk, she said, about staying, not staying forever, not building a city, just staying for now, for more than a few nights, maybe even moons. There was water, food, shelter, familiar trails, crocodile-poop sunscreen. If it came to that again, Darrow grunted. Settling in one place? That's new. We've done worse things, Carr said. Heek nodded sagely. I once lived in a tree for a month. Had a snail as a roommate. Tuka looked at the trees, the river, the open space. Then she looked at her hands. I didn't throw the spear today, she said. Did you want to? Carr asked. I thought I did. That was enough. That night, the fire burned a little steadier. The clan talked about the idea of planting something. Maybe burying some old seeds Heek had been hoarding in her hair. Don't ask. Maybe building better sleeping shelters. Un declared he was going to build a school for rodents, and no one stopped him. Pell sat with Grell and discussed drying meat for storage, in case the deer decided to forgive them with its body later. Darrow, for once, was sketching something in the dirt with a stick. A layout, maybe. Of what? No one asked. But it had squares, and paths. As for Hearn, he was trying to teach the mouse how to dance. Badly. Joke 2. She only does interpretive. They all slept easier that night. The wind was quiet, the trees stood guard, and in Tuka's dream, the deer returned. Not running, not hunted, just there. She stood beside it. No spear, just stillness. And for the first time she didn't feel like prey or predator, just someone who belonged. At dawn, as the first light crept through the branches and turned the sky the colour of quiet promises, the clan began their day slower than usual. No rush, no panic. Un was humming to Crip. Carr was sharpening her tools with no real urgency. Darrow and Heek were debating the spiritual symbolism of flat rocks. Heek said they were messages from the sky. Darrow said they were just rocks with self-esteem. Joke 3. Tired, but comforting. Tuka walked down to the stream, barefoot, letting her feet remember what it felt like to not be going somewhere. She crouched at the edge, cupped water in her hands, and sipped. Cool, fresh, steady. The deer hadn't needed to fall. The hunt hadn't needed to end in blood, and the forest hadn't needed to be tamed. Sometimes, survival wasn't about taking. It was about pausing, listening, breathing, living. They didn't wake up planning to find paradise. It was just another morning. The sun rose without drama. The bugs were less bitey than usual. The air smelled like moss, and maybe, just maybe, honey. Car stretched her arms and said, "I didn't wake up with something crawling on me. That's a first." Grell sniffed the breeze and muttered, "This place doesn't hate us." That was joke one, but no one laughed. They were too busy wondering if he was right. The new valley had arrived in pieces. First, the water, the clean kind, that didn't fight you when you tried to drink it. Then the trees, tall and swaying like they were whispering secrets to each other. And finally, the soil. Rich, dark, soft beneath their bare feet. Tuka walked the perimeter with Car, testing each step like she expected the earth to vanish. But it didn't. It just welcomed her quietly, politely. "This could be home," she said, mostly to herself. Car didn't answer. She was already kneeling, digging into the earth with a stick, checking how deep the roots ran. Her hands moved like she was braiding a new idea into place. Behind them, Darrow and Grell were experimenting with stone placements, flat rocks for sitting, tall ones for leaning, a circle of them around the fire pit. Not a building. Not yet. Just arrangement. The others were catching on. Pell had lined up the remaining dried meats on a log, muttering something about storage protocols, like she'd just invented the Stone Age version of inventory. Bren was gathering reeds from the riverbank, twisting them into shapes that almost resembled baskets somewhere between functional and interpretive sculpture. Even Hearn, bless his strange heart, had carved out a tiny nook under a tree root for Crip. The mouse had acquired a pebble bed, a berry stash, and what looked suspiciously like a hammock. "Don't judge me," Hearn said. "She's royalty." Tuka smiled. Joke too. He meant it, but it still counted. There was no announcement, no grand plan, but the signs were there. The way they stopped calling it this place and started calling it here. The way Car started collecting stones for grinding rather than for throwing. The way Darrow began watching the sun's path across the sky with a little too much interest. They weren't building a city. No one knew what a city was. But they were staying. Longer than usual, maybe long enough for Roots to notice. That afternoon, Kay and Heek stood together near the stream, squinting at a clearing. "We could dig," Car said. Heek grunted. "Dig what?" "A hole. A deep one. Put food in it. Keep it cool." Heek nodded. "And spirits won't eat it?" "No more than they already do." That was good enough. Pell took the idea and ran. Soon the clan had a shallow pit lined with stones and cool mud. They tested it with leftover meat, then tried storing herbs, then a small water pouch. It worked. It actually worked. Oon tried to jump in, immediately fell face first and declared it a snack cave. Everyone agreed the name was perfect. By dusk, a kind of hush fell over the camp, not from exhaustion, but contentment. The fire crackled in its now official fire ring. People were sitting on purpose-built seats. Tools were organized into piles. Grell had a designated napping rock, and no one was talking about leaving. Tuka sat near the stream, knees pulled to her chest. She watched the water swirl around stones, calm and consistent. It wasn't a violent river. It didn't roar or rush. It just flowed. Bren joined her, holding a reed basket filled with berries that didn't taste like feet. "You know," he said, "we haven't talked about the deer since that day." Tuka nodded. "It let us see what stillness feels like, and now we live in it." She leaned her head on his shoulder. He didn't move. Behind them, Oon was trying to organize a lizard race. He was the only contestant. Heek declared it a spiritual trial. The lizard won. Joke 3. By now, everyone knew when to laugh, even if they didn't get it. That night, Ka stood before the fire. The rest of the clan circled around. "I think we should stay." No dramatic speech, no ceremony, just a decision. Grell shrugged. "Fine by me. My knees are tired of running." Darrow nodded. "We can always move again, if it turns out we hate each other." "Too late," said Heek. "I already do." Tuka looked at the sky. The stars were where she left them. But they seemed closer now, like the world was listening. "We won't be the first to stay," she said. "Won't be the last either." Carr smiled. "But we'll be the ones who remember what it felt like. The first fire we didn't rush. The first shelter we didn't abandon. The air was warm. The fire was steady. No one scratched. No one argued. Not a city. Not a village. But a pause. A choice. A beginning. In the dark, the wind passed through the tall grass like a whisper. Stay. And for once, the humans listened. And now, in the soft afterglow of firelight, as the world slows around this strange little band of boring but stubborn sapiens, we breathe. There are no cities yet. No walls. No roads. Just footprints pressed into the dust and moss. Just hands on stone. Just one more night under a sky that hasn't changed, even though we have. Maybe tomorrow they'll plant something. Or not. Maybe they'll just wake up and stretch. Chase a lizard. Scratch at a flea. Laugh about nothing. Because this is what life was like before all the noise. Before bricks and buildings. Before alarms and inboxes and doors that click shut behind us. It was hard. Beautiful. Messy. Human. And somehow, through fire and bugs and poop-based sunscreen, they kept going. Just like we did. Just like you will. Now close your eyes. Let the stars fade. Let the fire die down. Let the ancient wind pass through your thoughts like a long-lost lullaby. Sleep. Boring sapiens. End of script. Good night.